morning, everybody. My name is Floris Tack. I'm a policy and legal advisor to Brussels Minister Pascal Smet, and he's responsible for transport, so mobility and public works, public space in the Brussels capital region. I'm going to talk about cities for people and how the sharing economy can support the shift from cities for cars, as we have seen for quite some time, to cities for people. First of all, short introduction to Brussels, short introduction to our policy goals and some projects that are underway. Afterwards, I'm going to talk about a variety of different sharing initiatives on mobility in Brussels and how this is supporting this shift. You want some? As a first, I took two historical pictures of Brussels. On the left, you can see the Grand Place, which is the most beautiful square, a historic square in the city center of Brussels. And on the right, you see the Leopold II Boulevard, which is an entryway to the city. With on your right, you see a big Citroën garage, which is now being shaped into a museum for modern art. What is quite obvious on both pictures is that it's full of cars. On the left, you see that the most beautiful square is a big parking lot that dates from end of the 60s. And another picture from the 60s to the right, you can see that the big boulevard, which used to be full of trees, now is lined with a huge flyover. This dates from a time when the city was for cars. This time has vanished for some part. To the left, you now have only tons of tourists on the square. To the right, the flyover has been transported and is now still in use in Thailand. How do we go from the city for cars to city for people? We have to know the facts. There's 1.2 million inhabitants. Half of them own a car, and half of all trips in the region that is less than 5 kilometers is still done by car. If you look at the commuters, 400 people enter Brussels every day, leave Brussels every day again, of which a majority does that by car. That's even subsidized by our federal government. So how do we go to a city for people? We want to improve public space on the one hand. We also want to improve mobility. Now, how do we improve public space? We want to create meeting places for citizens. Brussels is a very diverse city. Brussels has a very large proportion of people in poverty. And we want to create places where everybody can have access to and where everybody can discuss and meet each other. We want to have a high quality of life. I think that should be your first goal as a politician. Plus, we need a high quality of life to attract a middle class, to attract the creative class. Thirdly, we want to have a lower pollution. The ecological impact now from a city for cars is way too high on people. There's a high pollution of air, a high pollution of sound, there's a high pollution of light. On improving mobility, we have 3 objectives. We want to increase accessibility. As I said before, we have a lot of people with a low income in Brussels, and they have very small means of transport for now. We want to increase the mobility mix. Now, a lot of people only use car or public transport, but we want to increase the array of options that people have to make a trip in the city to the city from the city. Thirdly, we want to create a modal shift. We want to go away from the car as the predominant mode of transport to different modes of transport, and primarily public transport, bike, and moving by foot. Here are some projects that are already underway for public space. On the left, you see the most central boulevard of the city that has been closed for traffic and turned into a pedestrian zone. Works are underway to create a nicer environment, a nicer public space. To the right, another flyover that has been destroyed so that the 2 neighboring neighborhoods now have contact again and can actually enjoy the public space instead of having way too much sound pollution. Here you see a lot of other projects underway, mostly about squares that used to be parking lots, but now turned into high quality meeting places also for business to take place. On the top left, you have a shopping street that will be only open for pedestrians, biking, and public transport. And to the top middle, you have a new park that's been created on some wasteland and on some old car roads. For improving mobility, we have a new metro line. It's line 3 to the left. We have 3 new tram lines, a new suburban rail network that didn't exist yet. We have some park and rides that we are developing, 80 kilometers of new biking lanes, and an improved bike sharing system. So, about sharing initiatives. Let's say sharing economy is not something totally new. We have always had it. To the top left, you see 4 different companies, public companies that provide public transport. To the bottom left, you see the taxi. It's been there for, like, say, 2 centuries already. These are all different ways of sharing economy that make buying a transport good unnecessary or obsolete for buying transport services. Now, since 2000, there have been quite some new initiatives. As you can see here, these are new companies, new initiatives that have arisen since 2000. Especially in the last years, many new companies have arrived on the scene. The top left, you have the S network, which is suburban rail, still public transport. The top right, you have different bike sharing and even a scooter sharing system. The bottom left, Collecto, is a public service for sharing your taxi and thus lowering the cost for using a taxi. Carsap and Uber or other ride-sharing services that are built upon the smartphone. And to the bottom right, you have different car-sharing services from round-trip to free-floating systems. First of all, I want to stress this is not a total overview of everything that's in Brussels. I'm sure that there's new initiatives, and I didn't note every initiative. Second of all, I didn't make any distinction between public or private initiatives, because we believe that private initiatives are very welcome, and in any case, the government will need to look at it if we need to regulate. For public initiatives, in any case, the government needs to regulate things. Another remark that I want to make about this overview, we didn't include peer-to-peer private initiatives. For example, somebody owning a car that says my neighbors can also use my car. Why did I not include them? Because first of all, we see that it's only a minor segment of the market for now. And we also doubt that in the future it will become an enormous segment. From the moment people will shift from buying transport goods to buying transport services, they will have no goods to privately share. Why do people now share their car? Because they already own a good. It's a sunk cost. And as they own it, they might as well share it. But nobody would think of making an upfront investment of 10,000 euros for a car if he can buy or she can buy cheap transportation services. Now, how do all these initiatives foster our policy goals that I talked about earlier? Well, first of all, it has an impact on public space. We create more and better public space. First of all, there's fewer vehicles, so we need fewer lanes. That's very obvious. Then about road specialization. Now, a lot of roads in Brussels, they are quite small because of a medieval origin. They have and cars, and bikes, and pedestrians, and parking spaces, sometimes a tram, sometimes some buses, and other means of transport. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. If in the future we decide that some roads are mainly for car traffic, some roads are mainly for bike traffic, we can create, again, a better public space and more space for the citizens who actually live in those streets. Thirdly, we need less parking and we can have decentralized parking. If a car is only used for now 4% of the time and 96% of the time it is parked, if we increase the effectivity by sharing a car all of the time, it will perhaps be used for 50% of the time, which will decrease the amount of parking space needed more than 50%. First, and on the decentralized parking, it is already the case, for example, if we think about public transport. During peak hours, we need loads of buses in Brussels. In off time, all these buses are parked outside of the city centers in deposits. The same will hold for also car sharing systems, because at peak times you need all these cars, and at off times you want to park them as a company in a cheap space, and that's mostly not in the city center where space is sparse. So just imagine the view of a street that's not lined with cars that is right now, how much space you create for green, for other means of transport. Finally, you also have cleaner and safer public space. Why cleaner? First of all, less cars means less pollution. And because the cars are used more efficiently, you will have also ecologically more efficient cars. No car sharing system can have cars that are 20 years old, whilst you have loads of citizens that have cars that are 20 years old. Safer public space, that has to do with the road specialization. If you have to cross a road, and there's and a tram, and a car, and bikes, as I explained before, it is a hazardous thing to do. But if you create a public space that's designed for two means of transport and the rest is free for the citizens, that makes for a safe public space. Finally, the impact on mobility of the sharing economy. The modal shift and mobility mix is created by a few effects also. First of all, you have fewer vehicles, again, means fewer traffic jams. So you can use your car whenever it's necessary. Now in Brussels, very often you cannot even use your car when it's necessary because the cars are all blocked during rush hour. You have more transport options. As I've shown before with all the initiatives, now you can take your own bike, you can take a shared bike, a round trip one, a free float one. Whatever you are, you have tons of options at your disposal. You didn't have this before. Thirdly, you will have more conscious decisions from citizens before every trip they take. If I have a car and I want to go from A to B, I take my car. I already paid my 300 euros every month. So I don't think about the extra costs it delivers for me if I take my car now. If I have an array of options with sharing initiatives, I can say, like, if I walk, it will cost me nothing. If I take my own bike, it will cost me nothing. I have made some reparations. I bought my bike, but it will cost me nothing. Sharing bike system, perhaps it will cost me something. If I take a shared vehicle, it will cost me like 6 euros. If I take public transport, it's 2.40 euros. And if I take a taxi, it'll be 10 euros. And then you say, like, okay, I can easily go from A to B by transport. So why would I take a taxi that takes me 10 euros or a shared car that takes me 7 euros if I can do it for 2.40? The fact that you have to pay for every use and you don't make a big upfront cost, which you forget afterwards, makes for conscious decisions and people that will choose the right mode of transport for every trip. Finally, also important, it creates for an increased accessibility for all citizens. You don't need an upfront investment to own a vehicle. If you are a family with a low income, perhaps you're not able to pay for a car. Perhaps you're not able to pay for insurance. But if you need a car from time to time, you can at least use a car sharing system. Mostly there's no fixed cost or a very low fixed cost, and you pay for the 4 times you use it a year, 10, 20, 30 euros, but at least you didn't make an investment of 3,000 euros, of 10,000 euros. The same goes for bikes. Velo, for example, the public bike sharing system, it costs you 30 euros per year, which means that you don't have to make an investment on a good bike and you have a bike at your disposal wherever you are in Brussels, always with your family. Now, my minister isn't here, but if my minister had been here, he would have said the same thing as always, that sharing is caring. And in this case, I guess sharing is caring for the people in Brussels. Thank you. Can you open up for a question? I'm open for questions.
Yes. The microphone to the lady there. Here we go, on the back. That's.
Thank you for your presentation. I understand the importance of sharing, especially in Brussels, where we have so much traffic every day. But you were speaking about multimodality. Do you have planned in the future, because I know for a fact one big problem with multimodality is that we have a lot of options, but they're all out there. Maybe some people don't know them all. It's really hard. You need to go on one website, another website, and it's very complicated. So from a complicated point of view, plus convenience and comfort, are you envisioning of making an app that integrates everything and maybe a kind of service? For example, you pay 4 euros a month and you can use the bicycle plus the bus plus that kind of thing. Are you thinking about that?
Well, as I said before, I don't make much differentiation, although I'm in public service, between public and private initiatives. I think there's quite some private initiatives that does that in a good way. An example that pops into my mind is Mappy. We've seen the people of this app, and they said, like, okay, they include different modes of transport. They included Velo, they included Uber, they included classic taxi. So I think the market can deliver this. What we do as a public service, we want to create as much open data as possible so that the private sector can deliver on this, and we would like to work together with different initiatives. In all legislation to be recognized as a sharing company, very often we make the obligation to work together with the public transport company to make deals. For example, if you are subscribed to Cambio car sharing system, you pay less if you also have a subscription to the public transportation system. The same is an obligation for other car sharing systems. But I think in terms of communication, yes, there can be more efforts done to also communicate from a public point of view how people can combine these different modes of transport.
One more question, perhaps? Anyone? Yeah, right there. Here we go.
Hello. Well, this more as a question is maybe a suggestion, because I'm understanding that even with your public plans, you need to purchase like a lot of cars to make it feasible. But at the end, purchasing new stuff, consuming, and so on, is continuing the non-sustainability, let's say, in the usual consumption. Are you looking for any alternative in this for new innovations on buying cars that will be more sustainable?
let's say two things. If you have a certain transportation between 2 points that is very heavy use, so you have a lot of people actually making this trip, then it's better to provide public service, public transport. That's why I say, for example, rail systems are always necessary to complement the last mile that's done by a car sharing system, for example. But by having a car sharing system that's organized by a company, for example, it will be more efficient. Because if you need to buy an electric car, for example, it's very expensive for one family. If you share an electric car, at least you don't have the upfront investment. And companies will shift in more mature and more ecological technology a lot faster because they change their cars more often. So yes, if we have to reinforce public transport to make it work. And at the same time, I think by making it more professional way of delivering services, the services will evolve quicker.
Okay, now I told that because there is an interest movement about open source vehicles that I think it will shape very much your needs here. We can.
You can always my contact details are in it. You can always contact us to pass on the idea.
Great, thank you very much, Floris.
Thank you, Floris.
Thanks for coming.